My name is Gloria Thompson, and at 68 years old, I never thought I would start over again. After my husband died, moving in with my son James seemed like a blessing. His sprawling home had plenty of space, and initially his wife Katherine welcomed me with open arms. But within months, everything changed. The day James gave me that ultimatum, I surprised us both. I smiled, packed my bag, and walked away with my dignity intact. What happened next shocked everyone, especially them. Before I tell you what happened after I walked out, drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from, and subscribe to hear more stories about standing up for yourself. I spent 40 years as a nurse at Memorial Hospital, dedicating my life to caring for others through their most vulnerable moments. From the emergency room to labor and delivery, I witnessed thousands of life's most critical moments. My patients often told me I had healing hands, but the truth was simpler. I genuinely cared. That same care extended to my marriage with Robert, my husband, of 45 years. Robert worked as a high school science teacher, inspiring generations of students to question the world around them. We met at a school fundraiser where I was volunteering as a first aid attendant. He came in with a small cut from helping set up tables and joked that he needed immediate medical attention. His playful blue eyes caught my attention immediately. By the end of the night, he had my phone number. 6 months later, we were engaged. Our life together was comfortable, not extravagant. We saved carefully, took one vacation each year, and poured our hearts into creating a warm home. We had our struggles like any couple, but we faced them together as a team. Robert always said marriage wasn't 50-50. It was 100. 100. You both give everything. The heart attack took him without warning 2 years ago, a Tuesday morning like any other. He was making coffee in the kitchen while I was getting dressed upstairs. When I came down, I found him on the floor. Despite my medical training, despite the CPR I performed until the ambulance arrived, despite everything I knew about saving lives, I couldn't save the one that mattered most to me. After Robert died, our family home became unbearably quiet. The 3-bedroom colonial, where we had lived for 40 years, where we had raised our son James, felt more like a museum of memories than a place to continue living. I would find myself talking to Robert as if he were still there, setting 2 places at the dinner table out of habit, then crying when I realized what I had done. James was our only child, born after several years of trying. From the beginning, he showed remarkable determination. As a baby, he would attempt to stack blocks until they reached impossibly high towers, never discouraged when they toppled. In school, he approached every assignment with intense focus, not satisfied with anything less than excellence. Our relationship was warm throughout his childhood. We had Sunday afternoon baking sessions where I taught him family recipes. He would tell me about his dreams of becoming successful, and I encouraged everyone. Robert coached his little league teams, and we never missed a game or school event. The change began gradually during college. James majored in finance at a prestigious university where he met people from wealthier backgrounds. I noticed subtle shifts during his visits home. Comments about our modest furniture. Questions about why we never upgraded to a newer car. A certain embarrassment when his new friends would visit. After graduation, his transformation accelerated. James secured a position at a respected financial advisory firm and quickly climbed the ranks. His tailored suits replaced the comfortable clothes of his youth. His speech adopted the clipped, confident tone of his colleagues. He began to see his father and me as simple people who didn't understand the sophisticated world he now inhabited. Still, we remained close enough. Monthly dinners, holiday gatherings, phone calls on birthdays and anniversaries. The distance was there, but hidden beneath surface pleasantries. Then Katherine entered his life. They met at a charity gala 3 years ago, where James was representing his firm. Katherine worked in luxury real estate, selling multi-million-dollar properties to wealthy clients. She was striking with perfectly styled blonde hair and an impeccable fashion sense. James later told me he knew immediately she was the one. Their courtship was brief and intense. Within 6 months, they were engaged. The wedding was lavish, held at an exclusive country club with 300 guests, most of whom Robert and I had never met. I remember feeling out of place, despite being the mother of the groom. My initial impression of Katherine was positive. She seemed polished and ambitious, qualities I admired. She greeted Robert and me warmly at family gatherings, asked questions about James as a child, and even requested my apple pie recipe, claiming it was James's favorite dessert. Looking back, I can see the warning signs I chose to ignore. The way her smile never quite reached her eyes when speaking to us. How she subtly redirected conversations away from James's middle-class upbringing. The casual comments about how she was helping James refine his taste in wine, art, and food. After Robert passed, I tried to maintain our home for several months. I kept his garden, preserved his workshop in the garage, and slept on his side of the bed to feel closer to him. But the loneliness became overwhelming. Some days I wouldn't speak to another human being except for brief exchanges with grocery store cashiers or mail carriers. James began visiting more frequently, expressing concern about my isolation. During one visit, after finding me crying over a photo album, he made the offer. "Mom, this house is too big for you now. Katherine and I have that guest house on our property that's just sitting empty. Why don't you sell this place and move in with us? You'd have your independence, but wouldn't be alone." I hesitated initially. The thought of selling the home Robert and I had built together felt like another loss. Each corner held memories I wasn't ready to part with. But James persisted, painting a picture of a new chapter, where I could be close to family while maintaining my own space. "Think about it, Mom. You could help us with future grandchildren. We have that beautiful garden you could work in. It would be good for all of us." After weeks of consideration and encouragement from James, I agreed. I sold our family home, the place where Robert and I had shared 40 years of love, laughter, and life. The sale brought enough to supplement my modest pension and nursing retirement fund. I downsized drastically, keeping only what would fit in the guest house, which James assured me was spacious and private. As I signed the final papers transferring ownership of our home to a young couple with 2 small children, I felt both grief and hope. The family promised to care for Robert's beloved oak tree in the backyard, the one he had planted when James was born. With that promise and a trunk full of cherished possessions, I drove toward what I believed would be my golden years, surrounded by family who loved me. If only I had known what was waiting for me behind the manicured hedges of their elegant suburban estate. The first few weeks in James and Katherine's guest house were promising. The structure sat about 50 yards from the main house, offering privacy, while still being close enough for easy visits. It featured a small kitchenette, a comfortable bedroom, a cozy living area, and a bathroom with accessible features that James had thoughtfully installed before my arrival. Large windows overlooked the expansive garden, and a small porch provided the perfect spot for morning coffee. James helped me move in, carefully arranging furniture and hanging photos. He seemed genuinely happy to have me there, stopping by daily to check if I needed anything. Katherine brought over a welcome basket with gourmet teas, fancy soaps, and a new throw blanket in what she called contemporary colors that would brighten up the space. Those initial family dinners felt like the fulfillment of everything I had hoped for. 3 nights a week we would gather in their formal dining room, sharing meals and conversation. James would talk about work developments. Katherine would discuss her latest property listings, and I would contribute stories from my volunteer work at the community center, where I had started helping twice weekly. "It's so nice having you here, Gloria," Katherine said during one of those early dinners. "James has been so much more relaxed knowing you're close by, and I love having someone with your experience to turn to." I felt useful again, especially when Katherine asked me to watch her niece Sophia for an afternoon while she attended an important client meeting. The 4-year-old and I baked cookies and read stories. When Katherine returned, she seemed pleased, thanking me profusely and telling me what a lifesaver I was. The garden became my sanctuary. With permission from both James and Katherine, I began tending to the flower beds nearest the guest house. Gardening had always been Robert's domain, but I found unexpected solace in continuing his passion. My hands in the earth connected me to him somehow. I planted his favorite dahlias and the lavender he had always loved for its calming scent. For those first 2 months, I truly believed I had made the right decision. The loneliness that had plagued me after Robert's death subsided as I established new routines in my new home. I felt like I belonged again, part of a family unit that valued my presence. The shift began subtly. Katherine's first criticism came wrapped in what sounded like helpful advice. "Gloria, that casserole was interesting, but perhaps a bit too heavy on the garlic. James has an important client breakfast tomorrow, and I wouldn't want his breath to be offensive." I apologized and made a mental note to adjust my seasoning next time. It seemed a small accommodation to make. A week later, Katherine commented on my clothing as I prepared to join them for dinner with friends from their country club. "Oh, Gloria, is that what you're wearing? It's just that everyone will be dressed quite contemporary. Do you have something less dated? Perhaps something in a more flattering cut for your figure?" I returned to the guest house and changed 3 times before settling on an outfit that I hoped would meet her standards. When I rejoined them, Katherine gave me a quick once-over and a tight smile that suggested I had barely passed inspection. Access to certain parts of the main house gradually became restricted, though never through direct prohibition. Katherine would casually mention that her home office was in disarray from an important project, or that the formal living room was just cleaned by professionals for an upcoming event. The message became clear these spaces were not for my casual use. Most painful were the family gatherings where Katherine would position me at the far end of the table, away from the main conversation, or introduce me to guests as an afterthought. "Oh, and this is Gloria James's mother," she would say, already turning her attention elsewhere, before I could engage in any meaningful exchange. James noticed these subtle slights, but consistently downplayed them when I carefully tried to discuss my feelings. "Katherine is just very particular about her home, Mom. It's not personal," he would say, patting my hand as if I were being oversensitive. "She's under a lot of pressure with work right now. Once things calm down, she'll be more relaxed," became his standard response. As these incidents increased, James spent more time at the office, leaving earlier in the morning and returning later at night. Our family dinners reduced from 3 times weekly to once, with James often texting last minute that he would be delayed or needed to attend a client event. I tried countless approaches to improve my relationship with Katherine. I offered to teach her my recipes for the dishes James had loved growing up, thinking it might create a bond between us. "That's sweet, Gloria, but I follow a clean eating program now. Those old recipes have so much butter and refined flour. I've got James on a much healthier eating plan," she replied, effectively dismissing generations of family tradition as outdated and unhealthy. When I brought a handcrafted ceramic vase as a gift for their home, carefully selected from an artisan fair, Katherine placed it on a side table in the mudroom, a space rarely seen by anyone but delivery people. I attempted to connect through her interests, asking about her work and listening attentively to descriptions of luxury properties and high-end clients. I even researched current real estate trends so I could ask informed questions. Yet whenever I tried to contribute to these conversations, Katherine would smile tightly and redirect the discussion to topics where my input would not be relevant. That's not quite how the luxury market works. Gloria, she would say effectively, shutting down my attempts at connection. After each rejection, I would retreat to my guest house, increasingly aware of my status as an outsider looking in on my son's life. The home I had imagined sharing with family began to feel more like accommodations granted reluctantly to an unwelcome visitor. Still, I persisted in my efforts to belong, clinging to the hope that with enough patience and goodwill, Katherine would eventually accept me as part of their family. I held tight to memories of James as a boy, the son who had once looked at me with such love and admiration. Surely that bond could not be so easily severed by his wife's disapproval. I was wrong. By my 4th month living in the guest house, Katherine's behavior evolved from subtle criticism to overt control. She began monitoring my comings and goings with uncomfortable scrutiny. If I returned from an afternoon at the community center or a coffee with a friend, she would appear almost immediately questioning where I had been and with whom. "Gloria, was that Martha's car I saw dropping you off? I wish you had mentioned you were having visitors on the property," she said one afternoon, when my friend from church had simply driven me home after our weekly lunch. "She wasn't visiting Katherine. She just gave me a ride," I explained. "Still, we should know who's coming onto our property, for security reasons." This surveillance extended to my rare invitations to have friends over. The first time I invited Linda, my best friend of 30 years, to visit my new place, Katherine appeared within 20 minutes of her arrival, ostensibly to drop off some mail, but clearly there to inspect my guest. After Linda left, Katherine made her position clear. "In the future, we'd prefer if you would entertain your friends elsewhere. The guest house isn't really set up for socializing, and additional cars disrupt the aesthetic of the driveway." The garden, initially my sanctuary, became another battleground. Despite James's initial encouragement of my gardening, Katherine began criticizing my efforts. "Gloria, I noticed you planted those common marigolds near the rose bushes. They really clash with the landscape design we paid thousands for," she said one morning, as I was weeding. "Perhaps you should check with our landscaper before making changes." The message was unmistakable. This wasn't my home. I wasn't family. I was at best a tolerated guest whose presence was increasingly inconvenient. The dinner party incident marked a turning point in my understanding of my position in their household. Katherine was hosting a gathering of important clients and colleagues from her real estate firm. She had been planning it for weeks, discussing every detail from the menu to the table settings. That morning she appeared at my door. "Gloria, our caterer is shorthanded tonight. Since you'll be here anyway, would you mind helping in the kitchen? Nothing complicated, just plating and serving." Eager to be useful and hoping to improve our relationship, I agreed enthusiastically. I spent the entire day assisting the catering staff, following their instructions, precisely working diligently to ensure everything was perfect. By the time guests arrived, my feet ached from standing for hours, but I felt satisfied with my contribution. As I carried a tray of appetizers into the living room where guests were gathering, Katherine approached with a woman in an expensive-looking suit. "This is Diane. Our regional sales director, Katherine, said, then gestured toward me. And this is Gloria, our help for the evening. Not my mother-in-law, not James's mother. Simply our help. I felt as though I had been slapped. The tray suddenly felt heavier in my hands. James was standing nearby, having heard the introduction. Our eyes met briefly. He looked uncomfortable but said nothing, turning instead to refill his glass at the bar. I continued serving throughout the evening invisible, except when needed fighting back tears each time I retreated to the kitchen. Not once did Katherine acknowledge our relationship to any of her guests. Not once did James correct the misrepresentation. That night alone in my guest house, I cried for the first time since moving in. Not gentle tears of sadness, but deep-racking sobs of humiliation and anger. The reality of my situation became undeniable. I had given up my home, my independence, and my dignity for a place at the margins of my son's life. Living conditions in the guest house deteriorated as Katherine's attitude hardened. Maintenance issues went unaddressed despite repeated requests. The air conditioning faltered during a heat wave, remaining unrepaired for 5 days while I sweltered. When the garbage disposal broke, James suggested I simply avoid using it rather than calling a plumber. Family plans increasingly excluded me. I would learn about weekend trips only as they were leaving, with casual mentions of, "We assumed you wouldn't be interested," or "It came up suddenly." Most disturbing was Katherine's growing habit of entering the guest house without permission during my absence. I would return to find subtle changes. A photo frame moved a drawer partially open, my meager collection of jewelry clearly disturbed. When I installed a simple lock, Katherine confronted me immediately. "Why would you need a lock, Gloria? Don't you trust us? This is our property after all." The final violation involved Robert's possessions. I had brought only a few treasured items from my husband: his favorite sweater, his watch collection, and the handwritten letters he had sent during our courtship. I kept these in a cedar chest at the foot of my bed occasionally, taking them out when I missed him most acutely. Returning from a doctor's appointment one afternoon, I discovered the chest open and items rearranged. When I questioned Katherine, her response chilled me. "Oh, I was just looking for extra blankets for the pool house. I didn't realize those old things were so important to you. They were just taking up space, so I organized them a bit." The casual disregard for my most precious memories felt calculated and cruel. That night, I called Linda, unable to contain my distress any longer. "I think I've made a terrible mistake," I confessed, voice breaking. "I shouldn't have sold our home. I don't belong here." Linda, always direct, responded with the truth I needed to hear. "Gloria, this isn't about belonging. This is about respect, and you're not getting any. Robert would be heartbroken to see you treated this way." Her words resonated deeply. Robert had always protected my dignity fiercely. In our 45 years together, he had never once made me feel small or insignificant. What would he think of me accepting such treatment from our own son and his wife? With growing clarity, I began to recognize the trap I had created for myself. By selling my home and moving into their property, I had surrendered control over my environment and gradually my sense of self-worth. Each accommodation, each silence, in the face of disrespect, had eroded the strong, independent woman Robert had loved. I felt myself shrinking day by day, becoming a shadow in my own life. As my resentment grew, so did my certainty that something would have to change. I simply didn't know what options remained for a 68-year-old widow who had given up her home and invested so much hope in family that was failing her. The answer would come sooner and more dramatically than I could have imagined. The breaking point arrived on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon. Katherine had recently purchased an expensive crystal vase, which she had prominently displayed on the console table in their entryway. She had mentioned several times that it was a rare piece from a famous European designer, though she never specified the exact cost. I had been invited to the main house to discuss the upcoming holiday plans. As I was leaving, my handbag brushed against the console table, sending the vase teetering toward the edge. I lunged to catch it, but succeeded only in altering its trajectory. It shattered on the marble floor with a sound that seemed to echo throughout the entire house. Katherine appeared instantly, as if summoned by the destruction of her prized possession. Her face transformed from confusion to rage when she saw the fragments of crystal scattered across the floor. "What have you done?" she demanded, voice rising to a pitch I had never heard before. "Do you have any idea what that cost? Of course you don't. You have no appreciation for quality." I began apologizing profusely already, kneeling to gather the larger pieces. "Katherine, I'm so sorry. It was an accident. I'll replace it." Her laugh was cold and dismissive. "Replace it with what, your Social Security check?" This was a $12,000 Baccarat vase Gloria, limited edition. The figure stunned me into silence. $12,000 for a decorative object, more than half my annual pension. "This is exactly what I've been talking about," James Katherine continued, and I realized my son had appeared in the entryway, witnessing my humiliation. "Your mother is completely careless. She wanders around breaking things, disturbing my organization, interfering with our lives. She's becoming a burden neither of us signed up for." Katherine James said weakly it was clearly an accident. "An accident we'll be paying for," she snapped, "like we pay for everything else around here. The increased water bills from her excessive gardening, the electricity she wastes, the property taxes on the guest house we could be renting out for actual income." Each word struck like a physical blow. I remained frozen on the floor, surrounded by crystal shards that suddenly seemed to represent the jagged pieces of my relationship with my son. "Mom, just go back to the guest house," James finally said. "We'll deal with this later." I retreated, shaking, to my small refuge. For hours I sat in my armchair, staring at nothing, replaying Katherine's words and James's failure to truly defend me. Darkness fell, but I couldn't summon the energy to turn on lights. I felt completely hollowed out, as if the last remnants of my dignity had shattered, along with that ridiculous vase. Morning arrived with a knock on my door. James stood on the porch, his expression grim. No hug, no greeting, just a request to come inside so we could sort things out. He sat stiffly on my sofa, placing a folder on the coffee table between us. "Katherine and I talked for a long time last night." He began, not quite meeting my eyes. "We both feel that the current arrangement isn't working as well as we'd hoped." My heart constricted painfully. "James, about the vase. I truly am sorry." He waved away my apology. "It's not just about the vase, Mom. It's about establishing clear expectations for this living arrangement going forward." He opened the folder and removed a typed document. "Katherine has outlined some guidelines that would make your presence here more compatible with our lifestyle." The document was titled "Household Expectations," in bold letters at the top. As James summarized its contents, I felt increasingly disconnected from reality, as if I were watching a scene in a particularly cruel film. "Essentially, we need you to take more responsibility for your impact on our household," James explained. "That means daily cleaning of the guest house for inspection, seeking permission before using the garden or common areas, no visitors without prior approval at least 3 days in advance, a schedule for when you can access the main house which won't include times when Katherine is working from home or when we have company. With each item, my disbelief grew. These weren't guidelines for a beloved family member. They were restrictions imposed on an unwanted tenant. There's a financial component as well. James continued, his business voice fully engaged. Now, we feel it's fair for you to contribute more substantially to household expenses. We've calculated a monthly fee that represents your share of utilities and maintenance. When he named the figure, I gasped. It would consume nearly 3/4 of my monthly income. James I managed to say, my voice surprisingly steady despite my churning emotions. This isn't a landlord-tenant agreement. I'm your mother. His expression hardened slightly. And this is our home, Mom. Katherine and I have worked extremely hard for everything we have. We've been generous in offering you a place here, but we need to establish boundaries. Boundaries. I repeated the word, tasting bitter on my tongue. Yes, boundaries and expectations. He tapped the document. Katherine feels very strongly about this, and frankly, so do I. This is the only way forward that makes sense for everyone. I stared at my son, this stranger, in expensive clothes, who had once been the boy I nursed through chickenpox, taught to ride a bicycle and comforted after nightmares. When had he become this cold, calculating man who could present his mother with a contract for basic human dignity? And if I find these terms unacceptable, I asked quietly. James sighed, as if I were being particularly difficult. Then perhaps this isn't the right living situation for you after all. You could find an apartment, maybe in that senior community across town. There it was, the ultimatum delivered in James's carefully modulated professional voice. Accept Katherine's demands, and essentially become their servant or leave. Something unexpected happened in that moment. Instead of the panic or grief I might have anticipated, a profound sense of clarity washed over me. I suddenly saw with perfect precision exactly what was happening and what I needed to do. I remembered Robert's words from decades ago when I was considering abandoning a nursing promotion because a doctor had said I wasn't qualified. Never let anyone treat you as less than you are, Gloria, he had said. Your worth isn't determined by their inability to see it. To James's visible confusion, I smiled. Not a happy smile, but one of revelation and decision. I understand completely, I said, rising from my chair. This has been informative. So you'll sign the agreement, he asked, holding out a pen. No, James, I won't. His eyebrows rose. Mom, be reasonable. Katherine is at the end of her patience. As am I replied, moving toward my bedroom. Please, excuse me for a moment. In my bedroom, I retrieved the emergency bag I had packed weeks earlier, during a sleepless night when I had first begun contemplating the possibility of leaving. It contained essential medications, important documents, a few changes of clothes, and the small jewelry box holding my wedding ring and Robert's watch. When I returned to the living room, James stared at the bag in my hand with genuine surprise. He had truly believed I had no options, that I would accept any conditions rather than leave the security of their home. What are you doing? He asked. I'm choosing to respect myself, I answered simply. Something your father taught me long ago. You're overreacting, James said, his confidence visibly wavering. Where will you even go? I have friends, I said, thinking of Linda's standing offer of her guest room, and I have enough savings for a short-term solution until I figure out something permanent. This is ridiculous, James sputtered, his composure cracking. You're being emotional over a simple household agreement. I paused by the door, looking back at my son. No, James. I'm being clear about my value. I am your mother, not Katherine's housekeeper or emotional punching bag. I deserve basic respect, which has been in increasingly short supply here. You'll regret this, he warned, reverting to the authoritative tone that probably served him well with junior associates at work. You're being impulsive. Actually, this is the most clear-headed decision I've made since selling our family home, I replied. I should have done it months ago. I took one last look around the guest house that had never become a home. Then I walked out, closing the door firmly behind me. Instead of heading toward the main house, I walked directly to the property gate, pulled out my phone, and called Linda. "Can you pick me up at the corner of Maple and Highland?" I asked, when she answered. I've finally come to my senses. As I waited at the end of their long driveway, I saw James watching from the front door of the main house. He made no move to follow or call me back. Even in that moment, he couldn't bring himself to choose his mother over his wife's demands. Linda arrived within 15 minutes, her familiar sedan, a welcome sight. As I settled into the passenger seat, she looked at my single bag, and then at my face. "You're really doing this?" she asked. "I really am," I confirmed, feeling lighter than I had in months, despite the uncertainty ahead. "Good for you, Gloria," Linda said, squeezing my hand before pulling away from the curb. "Robert would be proud." As we drove away, I didn't look back. James undoubtedly assumed I would cool down and return within days, humbled and ready to sign Katherine's agreement. He had no idea that with each mile between us, I was reclaiming pieces of myself. I had surrendered in my desperation to remain close to him. The woman returning to him, if I ever did, would be fundamentally different from the one who had just walked away. She would have her dignity intact and non-negotiable boundaries of her own. Linda's guest room became my sanctuary for the first 2 weeks after leaving James and Katherine's home. My friend asked no questions the night I arrived, simply showing me to the room and helping me settle in. The next morning, over coffee, I shared the full story, including details of the humiliations I had kept to myself for months. "I just kept hoping it would get better," I explained, cradling the warm mug between my hands. I didn't want to lose my relationship with James. Linda's response was characteristically straightforward. "And what kind of relationship did you actually have living like that?" Her question forced me to confront an uncomfortable truth. The connection I had been desperately trying to preserve was largely illusory, based on memories of who James had once been rather than the man he had become. My first priority was establishing financial independence. The day after my arrival, I visited the local credit union, where Robert and I had maintained accounts for decades. Though I had transferred most of our savings to a joint account with James after selling our house, believing it would simplify managing my affairs, I had maintained a small personal account with enough to sustain me for a few months. The manager, Mr. Daniels, remembered Robert and treated me with a kindness I had almost forgotten was possible. "Let's make sure you have complete control over your finances, Mrs. Thompson," he said, helping me open new accounts and ordering a debit card I could use immediately. My next stop was a meeting with Patricia Willis, an attorney specializing in elder law whom Linda had recommended. I brought copies of all financial documents, including the proceeds from our home sale and the gift tax forms James had asked me to sign when transferring most of those funds to the joint account. Patricia reviewed everything carefully, her expression growing increasingly concerned. "Gloria, did you intend to gift such a large sum to your son?" she asked. "I thought it made sense since I was living with them," I explained. "James said it would help with taxes and estate planning." Her lips thinned slightly. "I see. And were you aware that once gifted, those funds belonged legally to James, with no obligation to use them for your care or housing?" The revelation struck me like a physical blow. I had naively believed the arrangement was for my benefit and protection. Patricia gently explained that while we could potentially challenge the gift based on misrepresentation, it would mean legally confronting my son, a step I wasn't emotionally prepared to take. For now, let's focus on securing what remains and creating a sustainable plan going forward. She suggested helping me calculate a budget based on my Social Security pension and modest remaining savings. The figures were sobering but not impossible. I could afford a small apartment and basic necessities, though luxuries would be limited. Patricia also helped me revise my will and advance directives removing James as my primary healthcare proxy and financial power of attorney. "These are just precautions," she assured me, seeing my hesitation. "You can always revise them again if circumstances change." As I rebuilt the practical foundations of independence, an unexpected sense of freedom emerged. Each decision made entirely on my own terms, each problem solved through my own resourcefulness, restored pieces of the confident woman I had been before. Grief and misplaced loyalty had led me astray. Linda supported my determination to find my own place, quickly understanding my need to stand on my own feet. Together, we visited numerous apartments before finding a one-bedroom unit in a modest but well-maintained building near the community center where I volunteered. At $900 monthly, it consumed a significant portion of my income, but offered independence worth every penny. The apartment was 1/4 the size of the guest house, with dated appliances and worn carpeting, yet signing the lease brought more satisfaction than I had felt in months. These walls were mine. No inspections. No permissions needed. No judgment. My new home came together gradually. Linda helped me scour thrift stores and estate sales for essential furniture. My volunteer friends from the community center organized a surprise housewarming, bringing kitchen supplies, linens, and plants for my small balcony. Their genuine pleasure in my new beginning brought tears to my eyes. Reconnecting with my former nursing colleagues provided another avenue of support. When I shared my situation with Diane, who had been my supervisor in the maternal unit for 15 years, she immediately offered me a part-time position assisting with the hospital's community education program. "We need someone with your experience and communication skills, Gloria," she insisted. "The young nurses know the latest techniques, but they can't connect with patients like someone who's been in the trenches for 4 decades." The 20-hour-per-week position provided both supplemental income and, more importantly, a renewed sense of purpose. Teaching expectant parents and training volunteer doulas reconnected me to the core of why I had become a nurse, originally the desire to support people during vulnerable transitions. Throughout these weeks of rebuilding, James's reactions evolved in predictable stages. His first text messages expressed disbelief rather than concern. "Mom, this is completely unnecessary. Come home so we can discuss this rationally." When I didn't respond immediately, his tone shifted to mild irritation. "You're worrying, Katherine. At least let us know where you're staying." I replied only to confirm my safety, providing no details about my location or plans. His messages then escalated to frustration. "This silent treatment is childish." Katherine was trying to establish reasonable boundaries that any household needs. After a week of minimal responses from me, he called. I let it go to voicemail, listening later to his increasingly exasperated voice. "Mom, you need to stop this ridiculous standoff. The guest house is sitting empty while you're presumably imposing on friends. Whatever point you're trying to make has been made. It's time to be practical." His inability to recognize the fundamental issue remained consistent. In James's mind, my departure was a tantrum, a negotiating tactic rather than a necessary act of self-preservation. When I finally agreed to a brief phone conversation, his confidence that I would return had visibly wavered. "Where are you living?" he demanded immediately. "I've found an apartment," I replied calmly. An apartment. With what money? His tone suggested I was being financially reckless. With my money, James. My pension and Social Security. That can't possibly cover decent housing. Mom, this is absurd. You're being stubborn for no reason. I'm being independent. I corrected him. And my housing is perfectly adequate. The call ended with his frustrated declaration that I would come to my senses eventually when I realized how difficult living alone on a fixed income would be. His parting shot revealed everything about his perspective. "Don't come crying back when you need us, Mom. Katherine is completely done with the drama." I hung up feeling strangely peaceful. The conversation confirmed what I already knew. James still didn't understand that his ultimatum had freed me rather than controlled me. As I settled into my new life, Linda began hearing rumors through our mutual connections about trouble in James and Katherine's perfect world. Apparently, James had missed an important client meeting to deal with what he vaguely described as family issues resulting in the loss of a significant account. More concerning were whispers about Katherine's spending habits. The wife of James's colleague mentioned at their book club that Katherine had purchased a second luxury vehicle despite James's apparent objection, creating visible tension between them at the company's recent dinner party. "I'm not telling you this to make you feel better about leaving," Linda clarified during our weekly lunch. "Just thought you should know that all might not be well in paradise." I felt no satisfaction in their difficulties, only sadness that my absence had apparently failed to resolve whatever underlying issues existed in their marriage. Still, I maintained my distance, focusing instead on nurturing my newfound independence and rebuilding my sense of self-worth one day at a time. Little did I know that what Linda had heard were merely the first tremors of a seismic shift about to rock James and Katherine's carefully constructed facade of perfection. The first substantial news of James and Katherine's troubles came 6 weeks after my departure through an unexpected channel. I was selecting produce at the local farmers' market when someone called my name. Turning, I found myself face to face with Michael Reynolds, one of James's colleagues from the financial firm. "Gloria, I thought that was you," he said, approaching with genuine warmth. "How have you been? I haven't seen you at any of the firm events lately." I explained vaguely that I had moved into my own place, not wanting to air family difficulties. Michael's expression shifted subtly. "I see. So you're not. You might not be aware of what's happening then." My heart quickened. "Is James all right?" Michael glanced around uncomfortably before lowering his voice. "There's an internal investigation happening at the firm. Several client accounts managed by James have shown irregularities. Nothing's official yet, but—" He trailed off meaningfully. "What kind of irregularities?" I asked, cold dread spreading through me. I probably shouldn't say more. Michael hedged, then seemed to make a decision. "But as his mother, you should know they're looking at unusual cash transfers and investment choices that strongly benefited certain development projects. Projects that happened to be properties marketed by Katherine's real estate firm. The implications were clear and disturbing." Michael excused himself shortly after leaving me standing amid bustling market stalls, my shopping forgotten as I processed this information. That evening, I searched online for any public information about James's firm. Nothing appeared in news sources but local business. Social media contained veiled references to trouble at Henderson Financial and speculation about partners being questioned. Within 2 weeks, the situation had apparently escalated. Linda arrived at our regular coffee meeting, visibly bursting with news. "Their house is on the market," she announced without preamble. "Margaret lives 3 doors down from them and said a for sale sign went up yesterday. The asking price is well below what properties in that neighborhood typically go for." "A quick sale price," I murmured, my mind racing. "There's more," Linda continued. "Margaret overheard Katherine screaming at James about promises you couldn't keep and I wouldn't be in this mess if you had handled things properly. They didn't even try to keep their voices down." Each new development painted an increasingly troubling picture. Through various community connections, details emerged in fragments that gradually formed a coherent narrative. James had indeed been suspended from the financial firm pending investigation. Katherine, facing her own financial pressures, had apparently been living far beyond even their considerable means. Credit card debt in excess of $200,000 had been discovered when they applied for a home equity loan to tide them over during James's suspension. Most shocking was the revelation about Katherine's past that came through an unlikely source. I encountered Sandra Phillips, another real estate agent, while volunteering at a hospital fundraiser. When I mentioned my connection to Katherine, Sandra's expression darkened. "You know this isn't her first rodeo, right?" she asked cryptically. When I pressed for clarification, Sandra revealed information that Katherine had carefully concealed. This was not her first marriage to a financial professional. There had been 2 previous husbands, both wealthy men whose careers had ended in ethical investigations and financial ruin. Katherine had emerged from each marriage financially intact, if not enriched, before reinventing herself in a new city. "She's known in certain real estate circles," Sandra explained. "Always attaches herself to promising financial types, pushes for bigger houses, more impressive cars, extravagant lifestyles that require their earnings to stretch further and further. When they start cutting corners professionally to keep up, she's somehow never implicated but always moves on." This pattern explained Katherine's immediate hostility toward me. As James's mother, I represented a potential witness to changes in his behavior, a voice of caution that might disrupt her influence, and possibly a claim on resources she considered rightfully hers. I absorbed this information with a complex mix of emotions, vindication that my concerns about Katherine had been justified grief for James's poor choices and guilt at the question that haunted me. Could I have prevented this had I recognized Katherine's nature earlier? 3 months after my departure, on a rainy Tuesday evening, an unexpected knock came at my apartment door. Through the peephole, I saw James standing in the hallway, shoulders slumped hair, disheveled, wearing casual clothes instead of his customary suit. For a moment, I considered not answering. Our last interaction had ended with his angry dismissal, but something in his defeated posture compelled me to open the door. "Mom," he said simply, his voice rough. "Can I come in?" The apartment I had once feared he would judge now served as my refuge as I invited him inside. James surveyed the modest space, not with the criticism I had anticipated, but with a kind of desperate relief. "You're doing okay," he said, more statement than question. "I wasn't sure." "I'm doing fine, James," I confirmed, gesturing for him to sit. "Why are you here?" He collapsed onto my second-hand sofa, running his hands through his hair in a gesture reminiscent of his father. "Everything's falling apart, Mom. The firm has terminated me. The investigation found improprieties in how I handled certain client investments." "Michael mentioned something about this," I acknowledged. "Properties connected to Katherine." James looked up sharply. "How did you know about that?" "It doesn't matter. Please continue." With halting words, James revealed the extent of their downfall. The financial investigation had expanded to include potential criminal charges for investment fraud. Their assets had been frozen. The house sale was necessary, not by choice, but because they could no longer afford the mortgage payments. Katherine had credit cards I didn't know about, he confessed, accounts in her name that were maxed out. When the firm suspended me and my income stopped, it all came crashing down within weeks. Most telling was his description of Katherine's reaction to their crisis. She blames me entirely, says I should have been smarter about covering the investments, that I've ruined everything. His voice broke slightly. Last night she told me she's been in contact with her attorney about divorce proceedings, says she needs to protect her interests before things get worse. As his story unfolded, I noticed something crucial, missing any acknowledgement of his own responsibility. In James's narrative, he was the victim of circumstance of Katherine's excessive demands of unfair scrutiny from his firm. The ethical breaches that had cost him his career were described as necessary accommodations to maintain their lifestyle. "I thought you should know I'll be moving out of state once this is all settled," he finally said. "Katherine's keeping the proceeds from the house sale as part of our separation agreement. I'll be starting over completely." Then came the request I had been anticipating from the moment he appeared at my door. "Mom, I know things have been strained between us, but I need help, just temporarily. A loan to get set up somewhere new. I can pay you back once I'm on my feet again." The old Gloria, the one who had moved into their guest house seeking connection at any cost, might have immediately agreed. That woman had been willing to sacrifice her dignity to maintain a relationship with her son. The woman sitting across from him now understood the difference between support and enabling. "James," I said gently, "I'm so sorry for what you're going through, truly, but I can't give you money." His face registered shock, then the beginnings of the same manipulative anger he had shown when I left. "I'm your son. I need help." "You are my son, and I love you," I affirmed, "which is exactly why I can't rescue you from the consequences of your choices. That wouldn't help either of us in the long run." "So you're punishing me for how Katherine treated you? Is that it?" His voice rose slightly. "This isn't about punishment," I explained calmly. "This is about recognizing that at 42 years old, you need to take responsibility for your actions. The choices that led to this situation were yours, James, not just Katherine's." "I made those choices for us for our lifestyle," he protested. "And now you need to make different choices for yourself. I believe you can rebuild your life honorably, but that journey has to begin with accountability." I saw the moment my words penetrated his defensiveness. Something shifted in his expression, a brief flash of the thoughtful boy I had raised. "What am I supposed to do?" he asked, sounding younger and more vulnerable than he had in years. "Start over, honestly," I suggested. "Accept the legal consequences of your actions. Find work that doesn't require professional licensing if those are suspended. Live within modest means. Rebuild your integrity, one decision at a time." We talked for another hour, covering practical suggestions and emotional truths he had been avoiding. I offered what I could: emotional support, occasional meals, connections to people who might provide entry-level work opportunities. What I wouldn't offer was financial rescue or absolution from responsibility. When he finally left, something had changed between us. The pretense of his superiority had evaporated along with his wealth and status. For perhaps the first time since his adolescence, James had been forced to see me not just as his mother, but as a person of substance and wisdom in my own right. Whether this recognition would last remained to be seen, People in crisis often make realizations they later abandon when circumstances improve. But as I closed the door behind him, I felt cautiously hopeful that from these painful ruins, a more authentic relationship might eventually emerge. 6 months after walking away from James and Katherine's home, my new life had taken on patterns and pleasures I could never have anticipated during those dark days in the guest house. My modest apartment had become a true sanctuary, decorated with carefully chosen thrift store finds and meaningful items from friends. The small balcony overflowed with container plants, my way of continuing Robert's gardening legacy in a space that was entirely mine. My part-time position at the hospital had expanded to 30 hours weekly as the community education program grew in popularity. Working with expectant parents and training doulas connected me to a community of people who valued my experience and wisdom. The additional income allowed small luxuries, occasional dinners out with Linda tickets to the community theater, and a membership to the botanical gardens where I volunteered once monthly. New friendships blossomed through my involvement in a senior center art class where I discovered a surprising talent for watercolor painting. My first completed work, a simple rendering of Robert's favorite oak tree, now hung in my living room as a reminder that growth can happen at any age. Most healing was my weekly grief support group at the local church. There I finally properly mourned Robert after realizing that my desperate attempt to maintain connection with James had actually interrupted my grief process. Among others who understood profound loss, I could speak openly about both my husband's death and the complicated pain of my son's betrayal. Grief comes in many forms, the facilitator often reminded us. Sometimes we mourn relationships that still exist but have fundamentally changed. Through these sessions, I gradually released both the idealized version of James I had clung to and my own guilt about failing to recognize Katherine's true nature sooner. Neither serving blame nor absolving responsibility, I simply acknowledged the reality of what had happened and my own role in allowing it to continue far too long. James's journey proved more difficult. After our conversation in my apartment, he faced the full consequences of his professional misconduct. While criminal charges were ultimately not filed in exchange for his cooperation with investigators, his financial licenses were permanently revoked, and he was required to pay substantial restitution to affected clients. The divorce from Katherine was finalized quickly with terms heavily favoring her. As Sandra had predicted, Katherine emerged relatively unscathed financially and had already relocated to another state, presumably to begin her pattern anew with another unsuspecting partner. With his career in ruins and resources depleted, James started over in the most literal sense. He found a small apartment across town and took a position in sales at a local car dealership. The work was honest, but humbling for someone who had once managed millions in investments and commanded respect in business circles. Our relationship entered a careful rebuilding phase. Initial weekly phone calls evolved into occasional coffee meetings, where conversation remained somewhat superficial as we re-established basic trust. I maintained firm boundaries, making it clear that while I supported his efforts to rebuild his life, I would not rescue him from financial difficulties or excuse continued poor choices. 3 months into his new job, James arrived for our coffee meeting with changed demeanor. Gone was the desperate edge that had characterized our earlier interactions, replaced by a quiet determination I found encouraging. "I've been thinking a lot about Dad," he said unexpectedly, "about how he always said that a person's character is revealed not by success, but by how they handle failure." He believed that strongly. I agreed, surprised by the reference to lessons I thought James had long dismissed. "I didn't handle mine well at first," James admitted. "I blamed everyone but myself. Katherine, the firm, even you, for not helping financially." He met my eyes directly. I was wrong. All those years of chasing status and appearance, I lost track of the values you and Dad raised me with. The acknowledgement, simple but profound, marked a turning point in our healing process. From that conversation forward, our relationship gained authenticity it had lacked for decades. James began asking about my activities with genuine interest, occasionally joining me for volunteer events at the community center or helping with projects in my apartment. Gradually, cautiously, we established new patterns of connection based on mutual respect rather than obligation or financial dependency. Each maintained separate lives, with appropriate boundaries coming together by choice rather than expectation. On the first anniversary of my departure from their home, James suggested we meet at a local park that had been a favorite family destination during his childhood. As we walked familiar paths in autumn sunshine, he asked a question that revealed how far his self-awareness had progressed. "Do you think you could ever forgive me, Mom? Not just for how things ended, but for how I treated you for years before that." I considered carefully before answering. "I already have forgiven you, James." Forgiveness was necessary for my own healing. But forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting or pretending harm didn't occur. It means I've released the anger and resentment while still honoring the lessons from that experience. "What was the most important lesson for you?" he asked quietly. "That my worth isn't determined by how others treat me," I replied without hesitation. "That at any age we can reclaim our dignity and rebuild our lives. That sometimes walking away from toxic situations is the most loving choice we can make both for ourselves and ultimately for those we're leaving." James nodded slowly. "I think my lesson is still unfolding, but part of it is understanding that success isn't about status or appearance. It's about integrity, about being someone people can trust and respect." In that moment, I glimpsed again the thoughtful boy he had been before ambition, and Katherine's influence had led him astray. The journey back to that authentic self would likely continue for years with missteps along the way. But the crucial first steps had been taken. My own journey continued to unfold in unexpected directions. The following spring, I was invited to develop a formal curriculum for the hospital's community education program, a part-time but prestigious position that validated my decades of nursing experience. My watercolor paintings were included in a senior artist's exhibition at the community center, with 2 pieces selling to my astonished delight. Most profoundly, I found myself mentoring other women in my grief support group who faced similar family estrangements or late-life transitions. My story of walking away with a single bag at 68 to rebuild an independent life resonated deeply, offering hope that starting over was possible at any age. Life now was simpler than during my years with Robert or my brief time in James and Katherine's guest house, but it contained a richness of purpose and authenticity I had nearly forgotten was possible. Each decision made independently, each challenge overcome through my own resourcefulness restored pieces of the confident woman Robert had loved and whom I was learning to value again. The greatest gift emerging from this difficult chapter was the freedom from needing others' approval to feel worthy. When I chose to walk away rather than accept Katherine and James's demeaning conditions, I reclaimed something essential that no living situation, regardless of its comfort or status, could compensate for my fundamental dignity as a human being. Sometimes the most valuable lesson life teaches is that the power to change our circumstances often begins with the courage to walk away from situations that diminish us, even when those situations come disguised as family obligation or financial security. Sometimes the greatest gift we can give those we love is allowing them to face the consequences of their choices rather than shielding them at the expense of our own well-being. Have you ever had to make the difficult choice between keeping peace and keeping your dignity? Share your story in the comments below. If you found wisdom in my experience, please like, subscribe, and share this video with someone who might need this message today. Remember that it's never too late to stand up for your worth, and sometimes the path to healing begins with the courage to walk away. Thank you for listening to my story, and may you find the strength to honor your own value in every relationship.